Kia ora, Aotearoa, and hello world. You are listening to the Yeah Nah podcast, the official podcast of the New Zealand Skeptics. I'm Bronwyn Rideout, and with me are my co-hosts, Mark Honeychurch.
Hey.
And Katrina Borthwick.
Hello.
In this episode, again, we have our usual mixed bag of topics. Katrina will be taking us down through the Uncanny Valley. Mark has dipped more than a couple of toes into the Epstein files to see if the claims around coded language add up. And as for me, I think I may have found us an early New Zealand skeptical icon. But you be the judge. But first, there's been a really interesting court ruling that was released in the UK this week. The Freemasons have failed in their bid to challenge the Metropolitan Police, one of the largest police forces in Britain, over the Met Police Force's demand that their staff declare that they are Freemasons or a member of another hierarchical organization. This started back in December when the Net made that announcement that they were requiring their membership to do so under the new declarable associations policy. It was really interesting to see that. And I guess I was kind of curious, Mark, from your perspective, what other hierarchical organizations are there in the UK? Because I know from where I am in Canada, like we have things like the Shriners, the Elks, Knights of Columbus, the Kiwanis, I think Rotary, we have Rotary in New Zealand, you have Rotary in the UK, there's Rotary in Canada. So I'm wondering who else this might be applicable to.
Yeah, so it'll be Rotary and things like that, I'd imagine. I imagine this stretches to all of those kind of fraternal groups. Herbalife, does that count? Or do you think MLMs are a stretch too far?
I guess it would depend on where you need to declare a conflict of interest. Like if you are looking in financial crimes and the financial crime involves an MLM, yeah, maybe you would have to declare.
But it seems like sensible legislation, doesn't it? Like the idea that, especially if with the hierarchy that's in the police, if that hierarchy is reversed within some organization where, outside of your work at the police, let's say your manager in the police happens to be lower down than you in the Masons, that will play into the work. Much as we can all say that, oh no, what I do outside of work doesn't affect my work. It will affect it negatively because it's going to be harder on one who works under you if it's going to have ramifications when it secret society and your ability within that secret society to be promoted or work your way up the hierarchy. So it's really nice to see this, and I don't mind if it's so expansive that it does cover MLMs and other things. It almost sounds like, why is this not happening the world over already? Why are not people being told that they do just have to declare these conflicts of interest?
I don't think it covers MLMs just because it refers to organisations where membership is confidential, hierarchical organisations and ones that protect members. And I think with the MLMs, it may be Rotary in that. I don't think they're secret.
Yeah, an MLM, you kind of do have to, the whole thing about MLM is recruiting and having a public profile.
So secret
you're not
membership.
Required to not disclose that you're not a member. In fact, you need to go and sell this to all your friends.
You need to let everybody know you're a member of an MLM. Absolutely.
Yeah. You make a good point about other aspects of public life or public bureaucracy. I'm just applied for a board position, and I have to declare any possible conflict of interest that may arise. So I'm talking about this is who my employers are. So in other aspects, we do have to declare those interests.
A nice segue here, surely, to our SGM, that in our new constitution that we are looking to have approved at our SGM in a week and a half, isn't there a new clause about declaring conflicts of interest in there when you become a committee member of the Skeptics?
Yes, there is. We now need to put together a conflicts of interest register, which I think we're really, really excited to get our Microsoft Word skills.
Can we make it a spreadsheet and not a document, please? It feels much more structured that way.
Yeah, I don't care. You're the secretary, Mark.
I'll do it. Awesome.
Happy to assign.
You guys seem so excited by this. I'm not really fully understanding the excitement here.
We need to be as squeaky clean as possible as an organization because we do often criticize other organizations for not doing the same thing and scientists for not declaring conflicts of interest. So, us having a list and making sure that we are, aware of our committee members' connections that might be an issue. I think that's really important.
The original demand by the Met Police actually has inspired some movement in New Zealand. So I was looking on the FYI website, which is our website for the Official Information Act. so people can take a look and see what the request is or has been and what the responses have been. We've seen some pretty funny things. Like it was through FYI that people were able to see people requesting if John Key was a lizard.
Yeah, certainly. And I think a lot of our more cooked conspiracy theorists in New Zealand, they tend to use FYI to make their requests. So it is really nice that we get to see how much they're badgering and annoying government departments with what often tends to be not even a set of questions. It's basically they're just lecturing the government department on what they think they've done wrong, but in the form of a question because there's a question mark at the end of it.
On January 7th, someone who just goes by the initials AC did send this to the New Zealand police, and the OIA request was specifically about Freemasons and Masonry. They didn't care about the question of other hierarchical organizations. Pretty much the same thing based on the ruling in the UK. And on January 29th, the police did provide the following response: that the membership of the Freemasons is not restricted, discouraged, or prohibited for any category of a police role, nor does police require staff to declare membership of the Freemasons or any Masonic body as a standalone or category-based disclosure. Membership of an external organization, such as including clubs, societies, or associations, is not of itself required to be declared unless it gives rise to conflict of interest in the specific operational, investigative, or corporate context in which the employee is working. And then the police do go on to list where there have been 2 complaints in which police membership in the Freemasons was noted. So in 2021, a complaint was received from a person who alleged that they were being harassed, stalked, mocked, and had been put online by police officers who were members of the Freemasons. And that complaint was declined as further action was unnecessary. And then in 2024, another complaint was received in which a person alleged that a police employee was involved in the renewal of the complainant's firearm license, and that police officer was Freemason. And again, that complaint was brought forward, and the body in charge saw no evidence of police misconduct or neglect of duty and took no further action.
Okay, so the police don't care. They don't think it's important. They don't think it's a potential problem. It's all good. Business as usual.
You know, when we think about some of the other work that we do as skeptics, particularly in terms of say like a cult space, it's going to be like, how do the police manage, having people who are in the JWs or the Mormons who may be involved in sort of broader crimes or complaints. We do have a pretty sizable Masonic membership in New Zealand, but I'd say probably far larger involvements in Jehovah's Witnesses and similar organizations.
And presumably they wouldn't be covered by similar legislation to the UK because their membership is not secret, or is their membership secret?
I think in New Zealand it is supposed to be.
But for witnesses or the Mormons, is there could
Oh,
their
they're
membership
not,
be
no.
considered? I mean, it is.
Yeah.
Maybe if you asked a church, give us a register of all your members, probably the Mormons would tell you no.
I guess the question is it a requirement to keep it secret, or is it just confidential? It's just sort of immediately obvious that someone might be a member of a church, if you know what I mean. If the church building is standing there on the ground with a big sign over it.
I mean, we can certainly talk from the position of an incorporated society. We have new sections within this new constitution that do talk about how members can request information, but there's really no sections or anything in our constitution or provided from the New Zealand Companies Office about how corporate societies would deal with external requests for information. Yes, members can request information from the incorporated society that they're part of, but the society still retains the right to decline or refuse that request. But they're required to provide a reason in which that request can be declined. Privacy, confidential, like protecting privacy of persons either living or dead, is like the number one response.
Yeah.
So whether that extends towards a church as, say, a more of a charity space, I guess that'd be worth looking into and researching further.
I mean, they'll be the same. I think like charities, churches, businesses, they all have a lot of latitude. Like, I don't think there's any kind of equivalent to the OIA or the LGOIMA, which cover government and local government respectively for companies. And, I'd love to have more transparency. Like, there's a bunch of businesses that I would love to be able to see into their finances some more. And unfortunately, there isn't much transparency there at all.
I think it's private information, unless there's some sort of shareholding. Those shareholders might have some more rights, but it's private information. But if you're an individual and that company's holding your information, then you should be able to request or ask for correction of the information. But that's only going to give you your own info at best. And as Bronwyn said, there's a bunch of reasons why they can refuse your privacy request. So, such as legal privilege, frank advice, all sorts of, there's some weird, and also the company can just be, the society can just be useless and slack and not really look at their request properly and provide what they want to provide. And the only way you can get around that is lay a complaint with the privacy commissioner, which most people wouldn't do.
There is that sort of personal admin barrier that some people are just not willing to jump.
Yes, I think so.
Alrighty. Now, moving from an organization that's known for its secret handshakes, it's time to talk about the Epstein files and claims that there has been some secret codes that have popped up in the emails. Mark, would you like to tell us a bit more about your investigation into this?
Yeah, I can tell you guys a little bit more, but as we just talked about before we started recording this podcast, I'm not going to go into some of the technical details because my article in this weekend's newsletter really went into a bunch of detail just to explain exactly why some of the weird stuff that's been seen in the Epstein files is there. But as a quick background for anybody that doesn't realize and is living under a rock, and there's probably a few of you out there, Jeffrey Epstein, convicted on trafficking, I think, offences, got a very light sentence like 15 years ago, then was arrested again for more serious offences and died while in prison, and was friends with a lot of very famous, very influential people. And Donald Trump, the current president of the US, has decided that these documents should be released, although they're being released with a whole bunch of redactions, a lot of which people are saying don't make a lot of sense. But we do have literally millions of files, millions of emails out there, and there is a rudimentary website that you can go and have a look to see what's in there. If you just go to justice.gov/Epstein, you can run a search and see what names are there. And the skeptical community has been looking at their own house and typing names of both, I guess, skeptics and anti-skeptics in there. And as I say in my article, a bunch of interesting names have come up. Lawrence Krauss has been known for years as having been a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein. But Steven Pinker and Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris and others are all in there and all appear to have met and spent time with Epstein. This doesn't mean they've done anything wrong. Look, to me, it looks suspicious. To me, like hanging around with someone that's been convicted for these kinds of offences, it still looks really weird. But then we've got the other side. We've got like Susan Gerbic and the SGU, the novellas, who are mentioned because they're a problem, because as skeptics, they don't align with some of Jeffrey Epstein's friends, and his friends included Deepak Chopra. We probably all know Deepak Chopra as being the man that says a lot, but none of it really says anything. A lot of quantum this and all sorts of like co-opting science nonsense to try and make it sound like it's compatible with mysticism and spirituality. And it turns out he was a really good friend of Epstein as well.
I guess we'd be remiss to not mention Rebecca Watson, who's been putting out like at least, 3 videos at this point, talking about how she and also other skeptics have shown up in the files. She also talks about things that happened that would have inspired Lawrence's complaints about her.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally forgot to put her in the article, but thank you for reminding me. She should have been listed in there, and definitely worth going and watch her videos. I think she's got to the point now where a lot of the issues that she's had in the past with other skeptics who have tried to cause her problems, she's past keeping it private and keeping it quiet, and she's happy to publicly let everybody know some of the just the bad stuff that she had to go through, and attempts to basically minimize her and deplatform her. But yeah, definitely worth looking up Rebecca Watson and her videos on the Epstein files. I gave a little warning in my article that basically when you see these numbers, like Trump appears over 1 million times, and for me, I searched for Lawrence Krauss and he appears more than 5,000 times, those numbers are generally inflated if you're using the official website, because every email and reply to that email and then reply to the second email, etc., it's all separate documents. So you really get this inflated number sometimes. So, divide it by 3, divide it by 5 in your head, and you've probably got a rough and ready idea of how many actual mentions there are of these people. And obviously click into the documents. If you're using this site, click in and read the documents, because someone might be mentioned and like with Susan Gerbic and Rebecca Watson, it's not because they're anything to do with Epstein, it's because they're a thorn in the side of Epstein or Epstein's friends. But looking into this, and not just myself, but I know others in the skeptical movement in New Zealand have been diving into the Epstein files. Tim at our local Wellington Skeptics in the Pub has been doing a lot of looking into what's in there. But one thing that's interesting is that there's a bunch of issues with the files. There's a bunch of random stuff comes up. There's a bunch of stuff that looks like something weird has gone on, and it turns out that people are looking at these little hiccups in these millions of files, and they're starting to see patterns. Maybe some of these words are a secret code, some of these words have hidden meanings, some of the punctuation maybe means something, and I'll run through the ones that I managed to find. The first one is really disappointing. It's basically a rehash of Pizzagate. So for those that aren't aware of Pizzagate, it was in the last decade, and it was kind of an effort to discredit Hillary Clinton, and it was all about pizza and other words being used as code words for child sex trafficking. It was also related to a pizza place and how maybe in the basement they were keeping some of these children. And there were ideas that, you know, the emails that were leaked from a guy called John Podesta, that maybe the mentions of pizza and walnut and cheese and other things in those emails were a secret code which they were using to coordinate their child sex trafficking activities. And this has just resurfaced. So now people are going through the Epstein emails and finding that occasionally Epstein talks about going out for pizza. And in a few mentions, it talks about pizza and grape soda. And so people are thinking, well, maybe this is connected to Pizzagate. Maybe this is the same kind of secret codes that are being used. But Pizzagate wasn't real. It was a conspiracy theory. And it looks very much to be the same with this. Like, there are very few mentions of grape soda. It's a weird specific drink that I can't imagine many people drink, but it's only mentioned a few times. And again, those numbers of mentions are inflated by the replies to the emails that were like, do you want to go for pizza and grape soda? Found this image online where there was apparently from the FBI that listed basically these keywords, but it doesn't seem like it's from the FBI. It's not real. And I found a bunch of perfectly innocent looking emails that match these keywords, like an email sent reminding someone to order some tomato sauce, journalist Michael Wolff being asked if he wants to go for a hot dog with Jeffrey Epstein while he's in New York, and a few other things like this, but none of it looked like the context around it could in any way be a method of controlling the logistics of trafficking children. So yeah, a bunch of nonsense. Following on from that, I found one new word. Apart from grape soda, there was this new word apparently that's just for Epstein, which is the word whoops. And Lad Bible was trying to tell people that whoops was a secret code word, that it was maybe something to do with killing people. But it's just Epstein's bad humor that when he heard about someone who died, he'd say whoops. So I guess it's probably for people he didn't mind hearing about dying. Seems to be the context, at least in a couple of times that he used it. And whoops isn't that much of an unusual word to use. I mean, I use whoops occasionally. When you've got like millions of documents, you'll expect words like whoops to show up once in a while. And sure enough, there are a few mentions of it. So that was the second one. That's the end of the standard keywords. The next one that was interesting was somebody that found an email in the middle of these 3 million documents that was titled Fur Cyclorama Hyacinth Herald, sent in 2004, and then the text inside the email started off duplex, besmirch, imperial, hall, aforementioned, just carried on with a bunch of random words. And somebody looked at this, posted it to the codes subreddit on Reddit, and thought that maybe they'd spotted a cipher, which is that when you look at both the subject line and the text in the main body, that if you take the first letter of the first word and the second letter of the second word and the third letter of the third word and keep going, it nearly spells something that might make sense. And so he was arguing that maybe this was a secret code. And it was great that a guy popped in really quickly and basically said, no, that's not what's going on. Like, this is 2004. This was the early days of combating spam, where Bayesian filters were put in that were trying to look for keywords and stuff that looks similar to existing suspicious emails, and spammers started stuffing their emails with just a bunch of random words to try and throw off these filters so that their spam could get through, or even just testing different mail servers to see how good their filters were, what settings those filters were using, because they would get a response saying it's spam if it's rejected. So it's basically, it's spammers just doing spammers things. So this was not a secret code at all. The next one, the final one, a bunch of mangled text. And there are 3 different things that came up in a question that I found on another subreddit. I think it was the Ask Reddit subreddit, this one. And somebody said, why do you think a lot of the Epstein emails have the same typos, like equal signs, extra letters, and extra spaces? And this person's right, like that's in there. Like, equal signs are really weird. Sometimes you'll see an email and there's just a bunch of letters that have been replaced with an equal sign. And sometimes it's not just equals, it's equals C2. That's quite a frequent thing that you'll see in there. And there are spaces where there shouldn't be, like a space before a full stop, or 2 spaces sometimes between words. It's just bad writing. Like, when you read a lot of these emails, they're written in a rush. They're written by people who are in the backs of taxis traveling. They're not proofreading them. They're using it more like an SMS. They're using these emails to and from Jeffrey Epstein just like an instant messaging service. So they're just writing it quickly. It's almost like a real-time conversation over email. Given this started in the early 2000s, it was kind of before we had decent clients for doing instant messaging, and before we had smartphones that made it easier to do that. So a lot of this is probably emails from Blackberries, I'd imagine. So yeah, so the bad spelling and punctuation, that is just how people were using this. But the other 2 were really interesting. The equals C2, it turns out, was a problem with encoding, where basically the equals C2 means that the wrong character set was being used to decode these emails, and it wasn't supposed to show up. It's supposed to be a control code that lets the software know there's some special characters coming up. But if you use the wrong character set to decode this, it just shows up as equals C2. And so there's a bunch of these through the emails. It's not what I found people saying online, that maybe it means command and control, and they're talking about command and control centers. Somebody thought maybe it was equals MC squared was being hinted at because Epstein was really interested in alternative energy. But no, this is just basically the emails have been encoded one way and they're being decoded a slightly different way, and that decoding makes this mistake. And the other one that's really interesting, and I can really understand why people thought this might be a code, but if you look at some of the emails, every 76 characters or so, a single letter is replaced by an equals. And the obvious thing there is, well, if we replace the missing letters back again and maybe just list the missing letters, maybe they spell something out. Maybe those letters have been removed and replaced with an equals because they're part of this code. It would be cool if that was the case. Most emails aren't long enough that you could spell anything useful doing that every 76 characters, because they're only like 100 or 200 characters long. As I said, they're treating these emails a lot of the time like instant messaging. They're not big screeds. They're just 1 or 2 sentences at a time. But again, this is another encoding problem. Basically, this is an issue with how the people that are processing these files and putting them online on this website, how they've been processing them. They've really messed it up, and they've used a piece of software that has replaced the new lines at the end of a line with types of new lines. So it's removed the Windows new line and it's replaced it with a Unix new line. And what it's done then is it's broken an old method of wrapping emails every just under 80 characters. So it's stripped out something that needs to be there in order to make the emails to being long rather than broken every 76 characters. And the way that this old way of doing it worked was that you'd put an equals and a new line, and then the email client at the other end could see the equals and the new line, go, cool, I know what that is. That's where some bit of software has broken this up into lines, and I can remove that bit and put it back to being a paragraph on one line. But unfortunately, because they've messed up the settings on their software that they're processing this with, it breaks the new lines by converting them into a different type. And then another bit of software chokes on that and goes, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to delete the bits that I don't understand. It understands the equals. The equals just looks like a normal character. But the next three characters, which is slash, N, and then one more character, which is the next letter, the first letter on the next line, those get deleted. And so one valid letter in a word gets deleted. The equals that was meant to be deleted gets left in. And so the files just end up with a bunch of letters looking like someone's gone in and deliberately deleted a letter and replaced it with an equals. But it's because the IT guys or the lawyers who were doing this, they don't know enough about what they're doing. They're not technical enough to know the problem, have spotted the problem, and have fixed the problem. And by now, this is like a sizable portion of millions of files. Like, to go back and do it again, I don't think they're going to. I don't think they're going to fix it. This isn't how they should have done it. It's horrible to think that there's some ambiguity there in this stuff, but I can't see them going back and fixing these millions of files. I think they're just going to say, well, we screwed it up. It's just how it is. And I guess it's, this stuff has been passed from department to department. From what I understand, the FBI redacted it before Justice then got to have a second go at redacting it. So who knows which organization even these problems, but I don't think they're going to be able to go back and do it again, probably without having to redo all the redactions. So I think the answer is going to be it's not going to be fixed. What I can recommend for anybody that's interested in looking in these files is, rather than using the Department of Justice official website, I would recommend going to jmail.world. And it's a really nice website where a bunch of IT guys have grabbed all the documents and they've made it look like a Gmail account. So for anybody that uses Gmail, it's a very familiar interface. And it's not just the emails. There's photos and travel details and a list of Amazon purchases and documents and photos and SMS messages. It's like the whole Google suite of apps, but it's all just so that you have a decent interface for going through a lot of this file dump. So if you are interested, jmail.world is a lot better than justice.gov/Epstein. I would recommend using that.
I just jumped into Gmail, and in the search box at the top, I just typed skeptic, and I got an email chain between Deepak Chopra and Michael Shermer, and they were talking about a book chapter that was being written about Deepak Chopra, and then he must have blind copied Jeffrey Epstein in it, and then Deepak and Jeffrey are having this weird conversation that's got, E equals MC squared. And so, if you want to have fun, just stick skeptic in there and you're going to get some weirdness straight off. Something, what am I looking at?
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about this at the last Skeptics in the Pub in Wellington, and how when we go through, through the Justice website, like how much junk is just in the Epstein files. Like, we're getting other people's conversation where Epstein's just CC'd in by Krauss and Chopra, all these people who are just chasing, they want Uncle Jeffrey's attention. That's a lot of that is, I find.
Yeah,
and it is pathetic. A little bit pathetic.
It's an interesting slice of things.
There's spam in there.
Yep.
Like there's stuff with dodgy stuff in it, but it's just, he's on a Washington Post email list or he's on some spam list or something, it's not exciting.
And again, I guess the moment that you would start excluding the spam is where maybe someone like myself would be like, "Ooh, there could be something interesting in there. I need to know. Did he actually open the file?"
Yeah. So if there's anybody you wanna take down, just slap their surname in there if it's an unusual surname. See if they're in it. You might be surprised to see, even tangentially, some famous people being mentioned. But I did check. So we forgot to say at our intro, Bronwyn, that we're looking at giving a life membership to Stuart Lansborough. I typed his name into the Epstein files just to double check that he's not in there. We probably shouldn't give a life membership to anybody that's in the Epstein files.
So that's how we're vetting people now, because
Stuart,
he's not there. His surname does not come up even once. We are all good.
I can only imagine what reason why Stewart would have been in the Epstein files. What, did Epstein try to win the $50,000 challenge? Did Deepak Chopra try?
Exactly. I imagine Chopra would be having packing a sad about the whole thing. I'd imagine that's probably the only reason why.
Alrighty, well, thank you for that, Mark. I guess the next piece is me. As I said in the intro, I kind of dug up somebody who, I guess he's sort of an unsung, long-lost skeptical hero, although, context and timing, maybe we wouldn't call him a skeptic in the way that we would understand it currently, but when I started looking through the paper's past archives, he did some pretty good work in a very difficult time to try to get people to think critically and debunking spiritualism. Who I'm talking about is Thomas William Driver, who was also known as a stage magician who was performing under the name of Professor Robert Kudarz. If you're ever in Wellington and you do a tour of the Karori Cemetery, you might actually get to see his grave. It's often kind of the last place they'll take you because it's like down a little ravine and it kind of tucked away the place. It's a very modest looking grave, but it's kind of cool because what makes it different is that there's a broken magician's wand on it. And what had happened is that it's sort of in the early 2010s, someone somehow found out that this guy was actually a magician. He had been a member during the later years of his life of the Society of American Magicians. And if you do know something about magic, well, the Society of American Magicians was Harry Houdini Society. He was the president and he was the editor of their journal. And these two had corresponded. This magician, who's all the way located out in Aotearoa, was sending Harry Houdini screeds and screeds and screeds of historical information about magicians who had traveled through Australia and New Zealand or had come from Australia or New Zealand. So it's really cool to kind of see all these old stories. And apparently they became quite good friends. There's a lot of grief from Harry Houdini when Kudarz died in 1922. And I guess what kind of makes his end very interesting, and the end is sort of a weird spot to talk about this man, is that he had been forgotten for, well over a century before someone had, rediscovered that, hey, here's his grave. He was a magician. They got the Society for American Magicians to come in and refurbish the grave. They had somebody come in from the Lower Hutt Magician Society to come do the whole ceremony of breaking the wand. He was born in New South Wales. He came to New Zealand at some point in the mid to late 1800s, and his main trade was working in printing. So I think at the time of his death, he was working as a printer for the government. This is back in the days when you are doing the individual typesetting with all the letters and printing it off on the old school press. But he did spend a bit of time learning the trade in Masterton, and he worked for quite a few papers throughout Wellington, like the New Zealand Times, the Evening Post, and I think even the Dominion at one point. And it's kind of interesting that quite a few people who were trying to debunk spiritualists and mediums at that time were actually all involved in the newspaper business. Probably a couple of years ago, I wrote about another pressman named Willie McLean, not to be mistaken for the William McLean I write about in this piece. That Willie McLean publicly debunked a couple of fake mediums. It seems that there's something going on in the press fraternity that make them a little bit more skeptical and suspicious of the spiritualist movement then.
Surely, it's the paper's job, it's journalists' job to point out when people are lying. I think that really is a good component of it. And I guess they also get paid in their day job to investigate things, right? So they have the skills as well.
Yeah, but at the same time, they would also advertise and they would interview, and sometimes there'd be very glowing reviews about these mediums and spiritualists as well.
Right,
Anyways,
they make money at both ends then, basically.
Exactly. But going back to the Karori Cemetery, there's this little grave. So he had a bit of a resurgence, about a decade ago into who he was, but no one really seemed to go much deeper into that. From what I was able to find out, Kudarz started performing as a magician in, again, the late 1800s, and very early on he was advertised as an anti-spiritualist. Spiritualist movement was very, very popular. We don't really get too many details as to what that entailed, other than one example of him betting a medium or spiritualist, saying, I'll bet you £100 that what you're doing is not real, or that I can prove that what you're doing is fake. And the first time he put down that wager, this person sort of quickly backed away. £100 in 1880 is equivalent to $23,000. So that was a lot of money. Wow. In that day and age.
Yeah, quite a risk.
So going under Professor Kudarz, he performs some stock standard magic tricks. Some of them are still performed today. He did that with his wife, and eventually his young daughter would join in. His sons, as far as I can tell, never participated. And he did that for, maybe up until the 1890s. He spent about a decade in Australia. Then he came back to New Zealand. He opened a magic school in both Australia and on Taranaki Street in Wellington. And then between 1904 to 1909, he was pretty quiet. I think he settled down. We don't really see a lot of advertisements from him about performing magic, but that sort of stops in 1909. And I guess that's where we get a real David and Goliath story. A lot of the advertisements that survive about Kudarz describe him as being the man who exposed Bailey. And it's like, well, who's Bailey? Like, did he really expose Bailey? So who is Bailey? Charles Bailey is described as an illiterate bootmaker. And I guess, I doubt whether, he actually was illiterate or if he was actually a bootmaker. Is that just part of the whole mystique to enhance the power that he eventually showed when he was starting to do his mediumship? He was born in Melbourne, as far as we know. He ended up gaining a reputation both as sort of a spirit medium. He would allow his body to be possessed by what he would call control. So these were like a sort of set of about 4 spirits. One was called Denton, the other was Whitcomb, and there were 2 Indian spirits. One of them was called Em, and one was called Abdul. But his particular specialty was known as apport medium, which means he would make an item materialize from an unknown location, or supposedly move an item from one spot to another. And he ended up gaining some really major patrons. One of them later on would be Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but his most powerful and wealthiest patron was somebody known as Thomas Walton Stanford. He was the uncle of the late Leland Stanford Jr., and actually it's Leland Stanford Jr. for whom Stanford University in the US is named after. Like Stanford University, the actual name is Leland Stanford Jr. University. So Thomas Walton Stanford, he made a lot of money in both the railroads in the US, and then when he came to Australia, he made a lot of money in real estate, as well as importing Singer sewing machines. So this guy had buco bucks. And yeah, he kind of got to know Bailey and just had Bailey basically perform at most of the seances that Thomas would host. Thomas, as the story goes at the time, had lost both a brother that he was close to and his first wife. His first wife died in childbirth. So that's how he got into spiritualism and mediumship. He was, very vulnerable, and he was contacting psychics. And all these psychics were claiming that they would be able to contact his dead wife and his brother. And somehow Bailey had the most convincing act. And that was a partnership that kind of continued from about 1902 to 1914. Bailey still was free to move around, but largely Stanford had him on retainer. So as I said, Stanford was really known as an apport magician. He was making things appear, and there are books and pictures of items that he made appear. I was able to find a picture of a big leopard skin rug, belts. He would really be known for birds, but he would also make things appear from across time. And these were some of the more questionable objects, like Roman coins, a Roman lamp that was like basically just a coconut with some twine. He would claim all sorts of objects were ancient and valuable.
Yeah,
now,
those ones are at real risk of somebody checking them with a local university, right?
Well, Thomas Walton, not that Thomas Walton did check. Thomas Walton just sort of imposed this collection upon Stanford University. He would send all these objects over, and because he's such a big patron, they did display the objects until the 1930s, but now everything's sort of hidden away.
Bit embarrassing.
Yeah, there was hieroglyphic and cuneiform tablets that were, eventually proven to be false. I think it's the Society for Psychical Research that did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of debunking Bailey, because they were doing that in 1906, 1907, 1910. Like, they were really following Bailey and questioning Bailey. They were sending a lot of the items that Bailey was making appear. They were taking them and sending them to the British Museum. And how bad is it when the British Museum doesn't want the stuff that you're creating? Because he was sending them coins, and they're like, yeah, these, the coins were real. Like the Egyptian and the Assyrian, the Babylonian coins, they're also pretty common, and they're very, very cheap. You can just go to any vendor in Egypt and you can buy these coins for a few pence, like whatever. And then there were other objects that they said were like, no, this is definitely fake. Someone else from the Psychical Research Society also tried to do the language trick. Someone had gone to Bailey and be like, okay, clearly if you were channeling this guy who can speak Urdu or Hindu, then clearly you can write, that spirit will be able to write like a proper Hindi sentence. And when he was finally cornered, it didn't go too well for Bailey. Bailey basically wrote a bunch of nonsense that didn't make any sense. And this person went to like 2 or 3 different people who knew Urdu or Hindi or various dialects. And they said, nah, this is nonsense. The Psychical Research Society, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's still around. In the age of spiritualism, it's kind of a very mixed organization. You have people who were both skeptics, who were like, we're going to disprove psychics. But also you had some very earnest believers who also wanted to debunk people who did not actually have psychic ability. So you have 2 very different perspectives and philosophies kind of coming together to do the same thing. And the membership really struggled with that relationship. Stanford's family in America are pretty concerned about all the stuff that Thomas is sending over. And eventually Thomas kind of forces them into a corner in about 1911. He donates a lot of money saying, yep, I want you to start researching psychic phenomenon. So they hire one of their first doctorates in psychology to research psychic phenomenon. And this guy does. He writes a really great book. He does some really great experimentation for the time and basically says, look, like, this is nothing better than chance. This is kind of one of the first formal research and empirical studies into psychic phenomenon. When he writes this book that disproves psychic phenomenon, I guess it feels kind of shady. He does dedicate the book to Thomas Welton. And it's unclear if Thomas ever read the book, because Thomas died soon after. But nonetheless, he still left about a $600,000 endowment to the university to establish a center for psychical research and related phenomenon. So it took the lawyers a few years before they finally were able to come to a consensus that the money could go to the psychology department, because at that time psychology did fall under related phenomenon.
All right, so they managed to make good use of the money in the end.
Yeah. But let's kind of go back a little bit to Bailey. Stanford knew that Bailey had a bit of a dodgy past. Bailey was the criminal and had been arrested in Australia for pretending to be a doctor and making a prediction or claim about an illness that somebody had, when it was really an undercover police officer who gave a fake story. In 1909, Bailey's advertising that he's coming to New Zealand, and Thomas William Driver was working in the government. So there's like at least one sly little column that comes out saying, the medium had been given seances in Melbourne at Mr. Stanford's circles for a number of years, and it is reported to have attained some remarkable results, which it is hoped local scientists will take steps to test. So it's like, who printed that? That's kind of interesting, whereas all the other ads have been sort of very neutral to positive, playing on Bailey's reputation. So it gets advertised that he's coming, where you can try to apply to go see Bailey's seance. And then Thomas Driver puts out in the New Zealand Times the first of a set of challenges to Bailey. This is another 100-pound challenge. I think at this point in 1909, it's still, $22,000 now. So it's still a big chunk of change. The initial challenge that Driver would fully and completely and satisfactorily perform any manifestation of so-called spirit power that he's permitted to witness Bailey perform 3 times. And so this, again, pre-internet, pre-social media, this all plays out in the paper. Driver does sort of issue the challenge to William McLean. Bailey is interviewed by newspapers about his mediumship and his seances, but it's really McLean who is the one who's interacting and corresponding with Driver in the newspaper. It took a few days, and McLean's like, yep, I support Bailey. I will also put down 100 pounds. Where's your money? It took another about 5 or 6 days. Driver does finally put down its money. And then they just try to fight it out through the press as to exactly how they're going to challenge, how they're going to test Bailey's abilities. And they never really come to an agreement. Driver wants all these different conditions. He's like, I want him to be in a glass cage. I want him to be stripped naked. I want him to be put into a bag. I want this to be done in full lights. I want this to be done in the town hall. I want everyone to be able to see. I want some doctors of my own choosing to examine Bailey to make sure he's not hiding anything anywhere. And then in turn, McLean's like, no, we're not doing that. That's not how we do seances.
It's great set of suggestions, though, isn't it? Trying to make it as transparent and easy to see what's going on as possible. There shouldn't be any worry about that kind of thing.
Exactly. But, McLean's like, actually, in our practice of a seance, we only have about 40 people in a room, and it needs to, like, the lighting conditions need to be this way, and he needs to be in this sort of setup. We had a counter to everything Driver had wanted. And it seemed like they had come to something of a compromise, and then Driver missed out on a meeting about the conditions. And then when he comes to the next meeting afterwards, they end up having a bit of a blowout because one of the conditions, which was something that Driver had initially wanted, was that Bailey would do 3 separate seances. And then Driver would also do the tricks after seeing the 3 seances. Driver wanted a new condition, which was, we're only going to do 1 seance. So Driver was pretty confident that he would be able to replicate whatever Bailey did. But at this point, Bailey had already done quite a few seances, and because of the stress, Bailey had a couple of seances where he didn't materialize anything, or the possession by the spirits didn't go to plan.
That's not good for people that pay for a ticket price to go and see him, is it?
No, I mean, this was part of McLean's rationale. He's like, no, it needs to be 3. That was your original condition, because he may not port anything, or he may not make anything materialize in 1 session. He needs multiple sessions. So this is kind of where Driver stomps off and says, nah, I'm not doing it. The New Zealand Times, who was kind of acting as Driver's agent in this agreement, well, £100. At that point, Bailey was burning out in Wellington. Even from the very beginning, when all this sort of negotiation was going on, Bailey was doing seances, and there were other members of the press there who were really pressing Bailey to make specific things materialize. They weren't satisfied with the birds or the threads or the Samoan mat that were being produced each and every time. They wanted a copy of the London newspaper or the Melbourne Age appear right now.
Nice, really good ones. Like a bird is kind of impressive as a stage trick, right? Where did he hide a live bird and be able to pull it out? But something that you just cannot have unless you have ported it halfway around the world. That's a really good request.
The thing with the birds, though, is that the birds were not, like, local to New Zealand. And they did make a big point in the newspapers that customs looked through his stuff, and the customs had said, there's nothing, he only has his items, there's no birds, there's nothing unusual here. Because that was one of the things that happened in Australia, is that they're like, wow, he's making these weird items and these weird birds and animals and, like, these Assyrian tablets and Egyptian coins materialize. That might be subject to customs duty.
Right. So he's not bought them in, but anybody else could have bought it in for them, or he could be purchasing them on a local market.
So despite this challenge put out by the New Zealand Times, that it was more favorable to the conditions that Bailey had wanted, nothing happened. And eventually Bailey disappeared to the South Island. He went to see some family in Timaru. He did some shows for the Spiritualist Church in Christchurch. He had claimed that he would come back to Wellington to resolve the issue with Driver, but he never really came back to Wellington. When he came back to the North Island, Bailey went to Masterton and again found a favorable audience with the Spiritualist Church or organizations out there. Driver, however, did go to Masterton. He stalked Bailey and actually came up to one of the Spiritualist meetings and said, look, let's do it. Let's do the challenge. I put you $100. Let's see if I can prove everything that you do is wrong.
Wow.
And Bailey would not take him up on it. So what is Driver going to do? Driver's going to put on a stage show. So Driver, did put on a stage show where he's like, okay, I will show you everything. I can do all the things that Bailey has claimed to have done or tried to do, and I'll show you how it's done. And that's what he did. We don't get quite a big explanation as to how he did it. More so that he did have his own cabinet and he was down to his pajamas, the same pajamas that they were going to give Bailey. And he just shows, this is how the trick is performed and how you would make things appear. And that seems to have been his act for at least a good year after that.
Oh, so he really managed to milk it. That's impressive.
Because that was sort of his tagline, and that was sort of how he introduced himself to the Society of American Magicians, as the man who exposed Bailey. But whether you would say he actually exposed Bailey, yes, I think he was very publicly persistent, but he wasn't the only person who was trying to challenge Bailey. It was all the random press people who were going to the seances and asking questions. On the other hand, the names of those press people have been kept anonymous. Could he have also been someone who was writing these screeds and screeds of negative articles about Bailey in the background that were unaccredited? I don't know. So I think he does deserve partial credit for being the man who exposed Bailey, but he wasn't alone. There were other people, particularly readers of the New Zealand Times, who were throwing in their suggestions and their 2 cents as to how Bailey can prove his abilities. And that's really cool to see. So Driver now has a show where he shows everyone how Bailey faked it all. Bailey would go on to France. So that would be about 1910. And what happened in France that everyone writes about in terms of Bailey's history as being sort of the beginning of his downfall. No one really mentions what happened in New Zealand. It seems to have fallen out of memory. In France, he does the same show. He makes birds appear, and there's a French member of the local Psychical Research Society who's like, I wonder where the birds came from. So this person, Albert Duroche, does go to the market, and he does find a vendor who is selling birds. And this vendor does say, yeah, these are the birds I sell. And I will say that, and Bailey did, buy birds from me.
Wow. So went as far as confirming that Bailey bought some birds that later were materialized, supposedly from somewhere else in the world.
Yeah. And so that becomes sort of the beginning of the end for Bailey. He still is able to find jobs. It's at this point that he builds that relation. He has that relationship with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but his relationship with Stanford ultimately ends in 1912, 1914. At the same time, Stanford was going to send their doctorate over to interview and study Bailey and examine Bailey for actual psychical phenomenon. So Bailey was obviously feeling the heat and the pressure and decided to flee Australia for a period of time. Bailey still, as I said, Bailey would become less popular. He would still do some mediumship, but eventually he would start shifting gears towards doing more lecturing and talking about spiritualism in general. He never really regained the popularity that he had when he had Stanford as a patron. Driver would continue doing more stage magic. I don't know how long he remained a printer for, but I do know that within a few days of his son getting married, he died. He died suddenly outside of his home. A friend of his wrote to the Society of American Magicians, and Harry Houdini publishes this on the first page of their magazine. This particular friend in New Zealand describes Driver as being bitter. Said he's a brilliant magician, great at his craft, one of the best. He was a great friend, but he was a very bitter man who died penniless, without family or friend, which is sad, but I did find sort of obituaries about him, and most people do recognize that he had a wife and he had kids. So I'm not really sure what story is true. But interestingly enough, items of his have made it over to the US and have been sold at auction houses. There's a book that he wrote about the Fox sisters. I can't find a copy in New Zealand, but a copy was auctioned in the US for about a couple of grand, which is crazy. For a book that was maybe 1 shilling back in 1920 is now $2,000. And this is not a guy who's famous, but potentially it's the signature of the other magician who was a private secretary of Harry Houdini, being the former owner of this book. That maybe is what popped up the value. There's a big scrapbook of all these nice little letters and notes to him. It was also over in the US. And that got sold for about a few $100s, or maybe it was a couple $1,000s on its own. But interestingly enough, a black and white copy of that scrapbook is at our National Library. And I just wonder who owned these objects and who sold them overseas. Because it sounds like this is like a really interesting piece of skeptical history, potentially, that has been lost. But nonetheless, we still have that little gravesite in Karori. And it's kind of inspired me to kind of look at others, all these other historical figures in free thinking, spiritualist, and again, skeptical history who might be buried in Karori. And potentially for our 2027 conference, which may or may not be in Wellington, maybe we can have a skeptical cemetery tour.
Could be fun, as long as it's not raining.
Yeah, or like 193 kilometer per hour winds. Alrighty, but look, that's enough for me battering on about history. For our final segment of the podcast, I hand it over to Katrina to talk about Uncanny Valley.
Yeah, this is something I've been kind of interested in a while. It's this sort of effect that you get when something looks almost real but not quite. And this effect was discovered by Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori back in 1970. And he just noticed that people's affinity with robots seemed to increase as they became more human-like. But then at a certain point, it just nosedived and people started to get really uncomfortable around these robots. And there's a bit of a graph that kind of goes with it. If you start to look at affinity versus how human-like something is, you start off with, I guess at one end, no affinity. You have an industrial robot, like a big factory machine that's, stamping widgets or something. And on the other end, with high affinity, you would have a healthy person, and everything else falls sort of on a spectrum in between, but it's not a straight line. The affinity starts to increase with things like stuffed animals, not moving things, humanoid robots, that kind of thing. But then if you start to get, dead bodies, or heaven help you, moving dead bodies like zombies, now you've kind of got a negative affinity. They're things that people like to avoid where they can. And so there is something getting triggered there that the thinking is it might be just some sort of built-in thing to detect anomalies, or maybe a sort of a pathogen risk. So it's not a good idea to hang out with dead bodies if you want to stay healthy, or people that have diseases, or leprosy, things that you can catch. And so we might have that built into us. And for some reason, when robots or AI avatars get too real, but they're not quite real enough, it feels a bit like they're triggering that sort of corpse or that diseased, or there's something wrong with this person thing in our brains, and it starts to make us feel really uncomfortable because, our monkey mind is telling us, if I hang around this person, I might get sick, or something bad might happen to me, or, they might do something weird that could hurt me. So in terms of visual effects, some artists, when they make programs, movies and things, they actually stylize the characters so that they look less human. So they might have bigger eyes, or big ears or something like that, so they're more appealing and engaging.
Yeah,
and
so
if
I
you
think
look at,
Toy Story is one of these, where the toys were all ultra realistic because they're not human, so you can make them as realistic as you like and it's not a problem. But the humans in Toy Story are very stylized. They don't look like there was an attempt to make them realistic, and apparently that was an understanding of the Uncanny Valley and an attempt to make sure that they didn't freak out the people that watched the movie.
Yeah, that'd be right. So just making them a little bit less realistic, so you don't see a lot of Beowulf. Remember the Beowulf movie? That was super hyper realistic, but not anywhere near good enough in terms. It was just freaky.
I think Polar Express is the classic example, because people have pointed to the eyes not moving like real eyes, how they're meant to move. That movie is a classic example of the Uncanny Valley. And when you watch it, and I watched it with my kids a couple of years ago, it is fairly unnerving to watch it.
Yeah, and eyes are a big tool, so you can use them, like muck it up and it looks weird. But also you'll notice in a lot of horror genre, people mess with the eyes. They'll make them black, or, because it triggers that Uncanny Valley effect. And if you start to think about it, a lot of horror depends on the Uncanny Valley effects. So Poltergeist, anything with a weird face, weird mask, weird appearances, aliens, and the scariest alien movie, the one that creeped you out the most, the one you don't want to watch, is the one where it's like the half-human alien, not the, monster aliens. So it's the wrongness, the thing that's crying like a baby that looks like a monster. And if you're looking for it, you'll start to notice that it's appearing in these things, vampires, demons with black eyes, the whole lot. And then there's sort of your less challenging examples, like, can you remember Mandalorian, and they resurrected Luke Skywalker, so they basically recreated him as an avatar, but it wasn't, of course, the actor, because he's a lot older now, and it looked really great, but it also looked really, really wrong. Like there was just something off about him. And there's a little bit of, we know what he looks like, we know what he moves, but there's a little bit of, it's just, he's just not right. And that was a bit creepy. So, and it was quite distracting because the whole time you're not going, oh, that's Luke, and, he's there and doing his thing. It was, oh, is that Luke? No, that's not. Like, it's just this whole thing. Your brain is literally short-circuiting, trying to work out what's going on with this guy the whole time.
It's kind of like plastic Luke. It's like it's Luke, but it just not quite moving as it should do. Something's a little bit wrong there. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what about say Leia, like Carrie Fisher's character, Princess Leia? Because there's been a couple instances now where a AI version of her have been used.
Yeah, I didn't think she came out quite so bad, but it's still not. Yeah, we knew it wasn't her.
Yeah, people have talked about how amazing it is. Peter Cushing was the other one where it's like, oh, it's so good. And they used, I think, his son as, part of the model on which they placed whatever computer graphics were more Cushing. And even then you look at it and go, it's really good, but it still doesn't feel right. And maybe it's just knowing that it's digitally done that makes your brain freak out. I don't know. But I really got the feeling like no matter how much they tell me that they've done a really good job, my brain is still telling me it's not a good job.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just they're missing the physical imperfections that kind of happen with normal humans, and no makeup is that good. And so there are some virtual influences. I think one is Lil Michaela, but it's just everything's just slightly off. So apparently I don't watch influencers a lot, but it's just enough to kind of freak you out because it's not just what they look like as a still, it's how they move that can also throw you off at big time. So an example of that would be Sophia the robot, which has done interviews, and it's, everyone's going, it's amazing what she can do. Saudi Arabia actually made her a citizen, this whole thing. But if you watch an interview with her, I was just sitting there laughing, going, this is so bad. Her reactions were so inappropriate. If it was a human, you would be like, this person has got some stuff going on. They're not interacting in a normal way. A couple of times she's asked about Blade Runner and just kind of blinks and like through gritted teeth, oh, Hollywood again. And then there's this pause, and then there's this gritted kind of weird smile that's not grated teeth. Like it's like she's trying to do what a smile should be, but it comes out really kind of threatening. And it's just, the whole thing's just off. And another example that has been around for a while are your waxworks. So you go in there, and even some of the good ones where they really capture people, they're just a bit off, like the face might be a bit skinny or the proportions are out. So you're trying to work out in your head you're just sitting there and your brain is going, that person, that, no. Yeah, it feels wrong. And when you look at some of the waxwork, and some of them are really, really bad, but some of them that are good are still not there. So there's that. And I guess speaking of movement, some of us will remember the dancing baby, a little dancing baby, the computer generated dancing baby. And of course the movement in that is just weird. And it sort of it's baby proportions, so it's not cute enough. So if you were going to make something that appealed to people, you would probably cartoonize it and make it, probably fatter and chubbier and bigger eyes and that kind of thing. It doesn't. It's baby proportions, dancing in an adult kind of way, and it's just so wrong. In New Zealand, we had a go, some of the banks had a go at making sort of virtual customer service avatars, and so ANZ and then ASB followed, and then people were literally going, are you okay? Like, it didn't look right. It looked like the person wasn't okay. And they were created by a company called Soul Machine. So I had a bit of a look into that, and it turns out they went into receivership this month. So apparently that venture was not the making of them. So gone. So yeah, those avatars were like 7 years ago or something. I think they tried that, but we certainly haven't seen a lot of virtual avatars helping us with our banking. It seems to have died in a hole. So TikTok trend, there is an Uncanny Valley TikTok trend, and this is weird. So I think, Mark, you thought it might be people that were doing body modification or I don't know, something like that. No, it's not that. It's people deliberately changing their facial proportions. So it's mainly a makeup trend. So if you go on TikTok, I'm not on TikTok, I had to watch on YouTube, but you go on TikTok and there are videos of people actually putting the makeup on, and you see what they look like before and at the end. And so some of they like putting mascara on so they can change the shape of their eyes and make them taller and wider, make their mouth go a completely different way too wide. Most of them are sort of whiting out most of their facial features so that they look more robotic. And one of them even kind of was using a sort of a stocking over her head to take away all the features and then put the makeup over that, and that looks so weird. Like she looked like a kind of a doll.
Yeah, so I wondered if it was
movie.
wonder whether it was the transhumanist crowd that were trying to make themselves, they were augmented and not quite human. But as you say, it's just a TikTok trend of people trying to look freaky and different, and I guess get clicks, right? They must enjoy it at some level that they look weird and different. But it seems to be there's a whole bunch of different ways you can use makeup to make yourself look unnervingly unhuman, which is fascinating to see some of the things they've come up with.
Yeah, and I mean, people who do makeup for movies and things probably know all this, when they're doing a horror movie makeup or special effects and things, but it's not something that normal people generally get into. But it is interesting in that you can sort of strip off your humanity a bit, and they do look, you wouldn't want to be sitting next to this person on a bus, so let's just put it that way. They look really weird. Okay, so the research is pretty much some of the stuff I'm talking about, but it's more, the effect's more pronounced if something's human-like but slightly imperfect, and it's triggering that threat detection. And they have done some studies with MRIs and had a look at people's neural pathways and what's firing off and that kind of thing. And they concluded, it's not just the appearance, it's the voice. So if that's slightly off, how people move, how it feels when you touch someone, so if their skin's not right. And it's mainly about things not aligning with expectations. So you see a hand, you expect that when you touch the hand, it will feel like a hand, not a piece of rubber. If it feels like a piece of rubber, boom, you're going to get weirded out. That kind of thing. They also noticed that there's a difference between cultures. So people from the US showed a greater sensitivity to subtle deviations from human norms than those in Japan. So people from Japan were more able to cope with those deviations. And when they looked at children and the elderly, they found that the younger ones are more affected by those deviations. Don't know why, but age does have an effect on the impact of Uncanny Valley. So I think good or bad, is Uncanny Valley good or bad? Well, I think it's actually a useful tool when you're designing things. You can make them more human friendly, things that humans will want to interact with. I mean, you can intentionally stylize things where they might cross that Uncanny Valley effect, like the Toy Story characters, and lift them out of Uncanny Valley by just making parts of them bigger and making them cuter. You can use it to make horror movies. So once you know what the effect is, you can capture that and use it. But I guess the problem is it also makes people feel really uncomfortable. You have a robot that's almost human but not quite. It can be a bit of a stomach churner. And also, if there's cultural and age-related differences, it might mean that the accessibility of whatever that is affected by how people react to it. So certain groups may be less likely to adopt new technologies if it's having this kind of weird effect on them. And also Uncanny Valley filters on, virtual influencers, which are not real people, that can still have an impact on real people and their mental health and, what they think they need to look like and that kind of thing. So it's that old thing of unrealistic sort of expectations of what your body and your face should look like. So I think it just depends on the context of where it's happening and how it's used. So it's really interesting. And I have to admit, this whole time I was looking into this Uncanny Valley, I couldn't help but think of this computer game called Skyrim from 2011, really old one. And the characters in it, they just trigger the Uncanny Valley effect. They're kind of human, but they look really wrong and they move really wrong and they do all these weird things. And so if you want to see it in action, I think you can still get that computer game. They might have made it a bit flashy now, but I'm pretty sure all the characters still do weird things.
Bethesda, who made Skyrim, also make the Fallout series, which is post-nuclear war, and they've got a bunch of ghouls and other things running around that it's fine for them to look freaky, but it, as you say, it's a lot less fine for humans to look freaky. You want them to look human, but yeah, I think it's less noticeable in Fallout.
Right, yeah. And I guess in Skyrim there are some other races there, so you can kind of get away with the elves having weird long ears and all of that kind of stuff. But they still look wrong and they still don't act right. And they still get stuck in the way and they just don't act like real people. But I think once you've been playing Skyrim, it's one of those games you get stuck in for hours. So you kind of just get used to its weirdness after a while, and it's there and it's not in your world, so it's okay.
I think one of the most well-known examples of Uncanny Valley comes from Twilight, and that baby, that the model that they were going to use for Renesmee is quite a horrific Uncanny Valley. Because, I mean, obviously this is a vampire/human hybrid, but people just did not respond well during the early screenings.
You've totally lost me now, Bronwyn. Should I watch Twilight? Is this a series that is worth it?
I don't even know what this is. I mean, is this the old? There was an old TV series.
No. This is the movies about human teenager and her 100-year-old or hundreds of year old like vampire boyfriend that was written by a Mormon from the that was very popular in the 2000s.
I was thinking of Twilight Zone. No, I have not watched the Twilight vampire movies.
Oh wait, I can share screen. Don't worry, but I think you do need to see this.
Oh, dear Lord.
Oh, that's not right.
It looks like Victorian inbreeding.
Yeah, that's not a child. That's something else.
Yeah, so I think they end up using like an actual human being, but yeah, this doll or this animatronic is very, very infamous.
Yeah, given that the vampire looks human and the human looks human, why would they make a baby that doesn't look human? What the hell were they thinking?
Infamous.
Okay, so I've missed something in my movie repertoire there, obviously.
Yeah, I guess you had to be into YA novels, and I guess a teenager who wanted a vampire boyfriend. If you're not that way inclined, Twilight would not have been the series for you.
Yeah, I missed a trick.
All right, well, thank you for that, Katrina. Now it's time for everyone's favorite segment, Membership Corner. Wellington Skeptics in the Pub, we are back at the Intercontinental Hotel, and you can find us in the lobby lounge from 6 p.m. on Friday, March 6th. Auckland Skeptics in the Pub, they'll be at the Dyson Fork on Tuesday, March 3rd from 6:30 p.m. Early bird tickets are on sale for our 2026 conference with our special guest, the Skeptics Guide to the Universe. Go to our website, conference.skeptics.nz. As we keep on saying, it's a bit of a bare bones website at the moment, but it has a link to our Humanitix website where you can actually buy our tickets. So get in on it, buy your tickets before the early bird prices expire. And then finally, at 7 p.m. on March 1st, we will have a special general meeting to ratify our Constitution. Mark and I have been hinting and talking about it throughout this podcast, so why we are doing this is not new. We have a Constitution that needs to be ratified under the new Incorporated Societies Act of 2022. Really, there are some new sections to read. They are mandatory, but we still need your yays and nays from our membership. So we have sent out a reminder on Wednesday, and adding to that, we're going to be doing something very, very special with our SGM, and that is, Mark, do you want to remind people what we're doing?
Well, yeah, we're going to vote on making Stuart Landsborough, who isn't in the Epstein files, a life member, which means that he will never have to pay for membership again. He has been paying for membership for literally decades. He's a very early member, and Stuart is the guy that used to run Puzzling World. His family runs it now that he's retired. The guy that $100,000 challenge to $100,000, challenging psychics to find a couple of things he'd buried on his property. We interviewed him on our podcast, I think early last year, maybe. Really good chat with him about it.
So if you want to vote and honor Stuart as well as vote on our Constitution, you do need to be a current financial member. And you, as I said, you would have obviously received a notification in your inbox this week. But if you haven't received any emails from us and you think you are a paid up member, please get in contact with us, either at committee@skeptics.nz or secretary@skeptics.nz or chair@skeptics.nz, and we will sort you out with the details. On that note of financial membership, it's the annual reminder for our listeners who are also Skeptics members that this is a time of year when many of you will be receiving your reminders about your annual subscription. Since it is an annual subscription, this is something that will automatically renew and deduct the subscription fee from your bank account. If you have any comments or concerns about that, please reach out to either committee@skeptics.nz or directly to our treasurer, Tim, the lovely Tim, at treasure@skeptics.nz for any questions. And finally, if you have any comments, questions, queries, kudos, or concerns about the podcast or the newsletter, please email us at news@skeptics.nz or podcast@skeptics.
Sorry, I just quickly your little outro there. I think there are 3 different starting letters, right? Questions, Q,
3,
kudos, C, whatever that one is. But it's alliteration. It alliterates even though it doesn't all start with the same letter. I think it's very clever. Well done. Did you get AI to write it for you?
This is before AI became popular. I've been doing this for years.
Okay.
Alrighty. Thank you very much for that, Mark. And thank you for listening. This is it for our episode of the Yeah Nah podcast. Kakite.
Until next time.
See ya.